On a typical evening, J.D. Vance drove into the gravel parking lot of Maple Creek Diner, his stomach growling with hunger after a long day. The diner, a cozy spot in a small town, was just what he needed. He stepped inside, greeted by the comforting smell of coffee and fried potatoes, and took a seat by the window. The waitress, Talia, approached with a warm smile and a menu. It felt like any ordinary dinner, but things were about to take a turn. Melissa, the owner, spotted J.D. and froze. As she walked over, tension filled the air. Her voice was firm as she informed J.D. that she could not serve him. "I can't serve you here," she said, her arms crossed. "I don't agree with your politics, and I don't feel comfortable having you in my restaurant." The room fell silent, every eye on J.D., but he did not react with anger or frustration. He simply paused, looked her in the eye, and calmly said, "I understand. It's your business, your choice." Without a word of protest, he folded his menu, slid out of the booth, and quietly walked out. As he left the diner, J.D. was aware that the eyes of everyone in the room were still on him, but he didn't feel the need to make a scene or escalate the situation. His stomach still rumbled, but there was a weight in his chest that had little to do with hunger. He wasn't upset, he was just saddened by the division. Instead of reacting with anger, he chose to respond with grace. J.D.'s calm, respectful departure spoke volumes about his character. He knew how easy it would have been to retaliate, but he believed in something deeper, a belief that kindness, not bitterness, could change hearts and minds. After being turned away from Maple Creek Diner, J.D. Vance could have easily retaliated. He could have jumped onto social media, calling for a boycott of the diner, or shared his frustrations with his followers, hoping to rally them against the restaurant. The world seemed to expect anger, outrage, and revenge from him. After all, he had been publicly humiliated, rejected because of his political views in a small-town diner where everyone seemed to know each other. But J.D. did something unexpected, he chose a path of kindness. Rather than fuming with resentment or seeking to make the diner pay for turning him away, he calmly sat in his car and made a phone call. When J.D. posted about his experience online, the reaction was far from what anyone anticipated. He didn't call for protests or even condemn the owner of the diner for rejecting him. Instead, he simply shared his experience with an open heart. He stated that while he respected the restaurant owner's right to refuse him service based on political differences, he couldn't help but note how good the food smelled. He went on to encourage people to visit the diner and form their own opinions, showing respect for the local business while promoting the spirit of community. This simple act of grace had a ripple effect far beyond the small town. J.D.'s post went viral, and people flocked to Maple Creek Diner, intrigued by the story of the politician who chose kindness over revenge. They came for the food, but many left with a deeper understanding of how small acts of compassion could bridge divides. J.D. could have easily fanned the flames of division and bitterness, but he saw an opportunity to be better. He saw an opportunity to show that even in a world where politics often seem to tear us apart, humanity and kindness still hold the power to unite us. His decision to respond with grace was a lesson in humility, a lesson that in today's world, a moment of kindness could be revolutionary. Melissa Hargrove, the owner of Maple Creek Diner, was no stranger to the struggles of running a small-town restaurant. Her business had been facing financial hardship for years, and every day felt like a battle to keep the doors open. When she turned J.D. Vance away from her diner because of their political differences, she believed she was standing her ground. It wasn't personal, she had lost everything in the recession, and her anger towards certain political figures clouded her judgment. To her, refusing service was a matter of principle. She never imagined the consequences that would unfold after that night. When J.D. calmly accepted her decision and left without a word of anger, Melissa felt a wave of guilt but didn't dwell on it too long. She continued running her business as usual, expecting the incident to fade into memory. But J.D.'s reaction was different. Instead of retaliating, he took a quiet yet powerful step. He shared his experience online, acknowledging the diner's right to refuse him service but also recognizing the quality of the food and the welcoming atmosphere he observed. It wasn't an attack, it was a call for people to support the local businesses that kept small towns alive. The effect of JD's post was immediate and overwhelming. The next morning, a crowd gathered outside Maple Creek Diner, eager to try the food and show their support. People from all over the area flooded in, and for the first time in years, the diner was bustling with customers. News vans arrived, and journalists began reporting on the story of how a politician had been rejected by a small-town diner, but instead of responding with bitterness, he chose to respond with kindness. It was a story that resonated with people, transcending political lines and focusing on something far more essential: humanity. Melissa couldn't ignore what had happened, but she struggled to understand why JD had done it. He had every reason to fight back, to turn the tables and make her regret her actions. But instead, he had done the opposite. He had shown grace. In her quiet moments, Melissa reflected on how her own actions had been driven by pain. Years of loss and hardship had hardened her, making her too quick to judge. JD's calm and thoughtful response made her question her own biases and opened her eyes to the importance of understanding, even in the face of disagreement. It made her realize that kindness, not just business decisions, was what could truly heal wounds. A few days later, JD sent her a heartfelt letter, acknowledging her right to refuse him service but also encouraging her to keep doing what she was doing, serving good food and bringing people together. Melissa read the letter, and something in her shifted. For the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her actions and understood the responsibility she had as a business owner, not just to her customers, but to herself and the community. In a world increasingly divided by politics, JD's message wasn't about winning or losing a political argument, it was about recognizing the humanity in others and responding to rejection with compassion. It was about understanding that everyone has a story, a reason for their actions, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply listen. Melissa had judged JD based on his political views, but now she realized that in doing so, she had forgotten the most important thing: he was just a person, trying to navigate his own journey, just like everyone else. The lesson was clear: forgiveness, understanding, and kindness were more powerful than any political divide. When JD Vance received the letter from Melissa, it wasn't just a simple apology, it was a turning point for both of them. For Melissa Hargrove, the owner of Maple Creek Diner, receiving that letter was like a revelation. It was one of those rare moments in life when the pieces of the puzzle start to come together, and the bigger picture suddenly makes sense. JD's words were an invitation to not only see him differently but also to see herself and the world around her through a new lens. His kindness, in the face of everything she had done, was both humbling and eye-opening. She had expected anger, bitterness, or even disdain, but instead, JD responded with compassion, a rare trait in a world that often rewarded division and hostility. The letter JD wrote spoke to something deep inside Melissa that she hadn't realized was there, a yearning for something more than just business success. She had spent years holding on to her beliefs, wrapping them around herself like a shield, trying to protect her restaurant and her family from the harsh realities of a world she felt increasingly disconnected from. But JD's gesture, and the kindness he had shown her, a person who had rejected him, forced Melissa to reconsider her beliefs. It wasn't about agreeing with someone's politics, it was about understanding that there was a human being standing before her, with his own story, struggles, and pain, just like her. The truth that JD had shared in his letter, that kindness was more powerful than any difference, hit her hard. Her response wasn't immediate. It took time for Melissa to process everything that had happened. There was a battle within her. One part of her wanted to hold on to her convictions, to stand firm in her beliefs, even if it meant losing the opportunity to mend things with JD. But another part of her, a quieter voice that had been silenced by the noise of anger and frustration over the years, told her that she had to make things right. The conflict between these two sides was like a storm inside her, but eventually, the softer voice won out. Melissa made the decision to reach out to JD, to invite him back, not just for the sake of her business, but for the sake of her own growth, for her understanding of forgiveness and second chances. When JD accepted her invitation, something incredible happened. It wasn't just about him showing up at the diner, it was about what that act represented. JD wasn't there for an apology, he wasn't there for a political discussion, he was there to meet a person who, for all intents and purposes, had been a stranger to him. He was there to embrace the humanity in Melissa, just as he had embraced it in that brief moment when he chose to leave without anger. His willingness to forgive was a powerful message to her, one that went far beyond politics, far beyond the diner, and into something more universal, the power of grace. Their dinner together wasn't just a meal, it was a conversation, a connection, a healing process. As they sat at the table, sharing stories, memories, and laughter, Melissa realized that JD was right. The world didn't have to be divided into us versus them, right versus wrong, liberal versus conservative. She had allowed her personal experiences and losses to cloud her judgment, but now she saw that understanding, empathy, and kindness could bridge even the widest of gaps. In that moment, she knew that JD had not only given her a second chance but had also given her community a second chance. The ripple effect of this one simple act was profound. JD's decision to show Melissa grace didn't just change the dynamics between them, it changed the future of Maple Creek Diner. Melissa's decision to accept that grace, to offer forgiveness and choose kindness, opened the door for a new beginning. The diner didn't just survive, it thrived. With JD's investment, the decision to accept JD Vance's offer of help wasn't just about a financial investment, it was about something deeper, something more significant for Melissa Hargrove and her community. It was a recognition that sometimes, the most unlikely people can offer the most meaningful help. For years, Melissa had been fighting her own battles, trying to keep her diner afloat in a world that felt increasingly out of reach. When the small-town restaurant was on the verge of closing, it seemed like the world was against her. But JD, the very person she had rejected with such certainty, was the one who came through when she least expected it. At first, accepting JD's help felt like a betrayal of her own beliefs. It was hard to reconcile the idea of accepting something from someone whose politics she disagreed with so fiercely. After all, her father had always warned her against doing business with people whose values didn't align with hers. She had seen firsthand the devastation caused by policies she didn't support, policies that led to her family losing their farm and her community struggling to make ends meet. But in the midst of all the financial stress and emotional exhaustion, JD's offer had opened her eyes to a different perspective. He hadn't come to her with strings attached, he hadn't come to change her mind or force his views on her. He had simply offered a lifeline to the diner and, by extension, to the people she cared about. It was a humbling moment for Melissa. The world she had known, where right and wrong seemed so clear, where loyalty to her beliefs meant standing firm no matter what, suddenly seemed too small, too narrow. JD's gesture of kindness, his decision to help without expecting anything in return, challenged everything she thought she knew about forgiveness, generosity, and reconciliation. Melissa had spent so many years holding on to her anger, her hurt, and her grief, all in the name of protecting what little she had left. But now, she saw that letting go of that anger didn't mean she was losing anything, it meant she was gaining something much more valuable, a chance to rebuild, not just her business, but her relationships, her community, and herself. When JD made the phone call to his friend who ran a small business investment fund, it wasn't just about the money, it was about believing in the potential of Maple Creek and its people. JD had seen something in the diner that others had overlooked, a place where families gathered, where friendships were made, and where a sense of belonging was felt by everyone who walked through the door. The investment was more than just financial capital, it was an investment in the future of a community that had long been struggling to survive. JD had taken the time to see the value in what Melissa was doing, even when she had not yet seen it in herself. And in doing so, he became a catalyst for change, not just for the diner, but for the entire town. For Melissa, this was a turning point. Accepting JD's help was the first step in letting go of the weight that had been holding her down for so long. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The diner, once a place of personal frustration and isolation, began to thrive. With the new investment, Melissa was able to renovate the diner, create new jobs, and provide health insurance for her employees, something she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. As the business grew, so did Melissa's sense of purpose. She wasn't just running a diner anymore, she was rebuilding a community, piece by piece. And this time, it wasn't just her own efforts that made it possible, it was the collective efforts of people who chose to look beyond their differences and focus on what truly mattered, the well-being of their neighbors, their families, and their town. As the diner expanded, so did the sense of possibility in the air. New businesses began to open, new projects were started, and the town began to buzz with the energy of new life. Melissa's decision to accept JD's offer was the spark that lit a fire in the community, inspiring others to look beyond their disagreements and focus on what they could build together. JD's investment had not only saved the diner, it had reignited the spirit of hope that had been fading from the town. The new jobs, the renovated storefronts, and the sense of possibility were all a result of a simple choice to show kindness in the face of division. As Melissa sat in her diner one morning, watching her staff serve a new wave of customers, she realized that the greatest gift JD had given her wasn't the money, it was the chance to see beyond the surface, to look deeper, and to find common ground even when it seemed impossible. It was a reminder that the future isn't defined by our differences but by our willingness to forgive, to help, and to stand together. And in that moment, Melissa understood that kindness, not politics, was what truly built communities. The diner had become more than just a place to eat, it had become a symbol of resilience, redemption, and the power of second chances. It wasn't just the building that had been renovated, it was the very heart of the community, and it had been made stronger, more vibrant, and more united than ever before. The decision to accept J.D. Vance's investment not only transformed Maple Creek Diner but sparked a larger transformation in Melissa Hargrove and the community around her. The journey that began with rejection and bitterness evolved into a powerful story of forgiveness, second chances, and the incredible power of kindness. J.D., a figure who could have easily been dismissed or villainized, instead chose to respond to Melissa's rejection with grace. His decision to not retaliate, to not fight back in a world that seems to thrive on division, created a ripple effect that reached far beyond the diner. What started as a single, quiet act of kindness evolved into a broader movement of understanding, bridging divides, and finding common ground. Melissa's internal struggle to accept JD's offer was filled with resistance, doubt, and a deep fear of betraying her own values. Her pride, her anger, and the memory of the hardships her family had faced weighed heavily on her decision. The pain of losing the family farm, the years of financial struggles, and the political divide she had internalized made her question everything. Accepting JD's help meant facing the uncomfortable reality that sometimes, help and kindness can come from places we least expect. It meant confronting the belief that people who didn't share her views couldn't be trusted or understood. Yet, in the end, Melissa realized that accepting JD's kindness didn't mean abandoning her beliefs. It simply meant recognizing that there was more to people than their political opinions or past actions. JD didn't come to change her politics or judge her for her views, he came to offer her a lifeline, a chance to save her business and, by extension, her community. His generosity was not rooted in politics, but in a shared belief that small businesses and local communities were worth supporting. JD's investment wasn't a transaction, it was a symbol of belief in the town and the people who called it home. For Melissa, the journey of accepting that help was just the beginning. As the diner flourished, she saw firsthand the power of second chances, not just for her business, but for herself. She had spent so much of her life building walls around her emotions, keeping people at arm's length, but in allowing herself to forgive, to accept, and to move forward, she discovered a new sense of strength. She realized that true strength wasn't in holding on to anger or stubbornness, it was in letting go of past hurts and opening up to the possibility of growth, even when it came from someone who seemed so different. The town of Maple Creek also experienced its own transformation. As the diner prospered, the sense of possibility grew. Other businesses began to flourish, inspired by Melissa's decision to accept help. The once struggling town began to feel more alive, more connected. What JD had done wasn't just about a financial investment, it was about believing in the potential of overlooked places and overlooked people. His investment in the diner was a catalyst that ignited change throughout the entire town, encouraging others to see beyond their differences and focus on what truly mattered: community, compassion, and the desire to build something greater than themselves. But perhaps the most important lesson of all was the realization that kindness is revolutionary. In a time when political and social divides seem to deepen every day, JD's decision to respond to rejection with grace and compassion was a reminder of the simple, yet profound, power of human connection. The world often tells us that we must stand firm in our beliefs, that we must never compromise, especially in the face of adversity. But JD's story teaches us that the true power lies not in winning battles, but in choosing to respond with empathy, forgiveness, and respect. The most revolutionary thing we can do in today's world is to choose understanding over division, to see the humanity in others even when we don't agree with their views. For Melissa, this lesson was life-changing. The diner had always been more than just a place to eat, it had been a symbol of her personal struggle, her family's history, and the weight of all the decisions she had made. But with JD's support and the community's growing belief in the diner's potential, it became a place of healing, growth, and connection. It became a reminder that no matter how difficult the journey may seem, there is always room for redemption, for change, and for second chances. The story of Maple Creek Diner is not just a story about a business saved, or a politician's unexpected act of kindness, it's a story about the power of choosing kindness in a world that often feels divided and unforgiving. It's about the courage to admit when we're wrong, to accept help from others, and to build bridges instead of walls. The lesson is clear: when we choose to respond to rejection and division with kindness, we don't just change the outcome of our own lives, we change the lives of those around us, and we make the world a little brighter, a little kinder, and a little more connected. In the end, the diner wasn't just rebuilt, it was transformed into something more than Melissa could have ever imagined. It became a place where kindness, forgiveness, and second chances weren't just words, they were the foundation of everything they did. The diner was no longer just a business, it was a living testament to the power of choosing to respond to the world with compassion, to see beyond the surface, and to build a future based on understanding, not division. And in that, there was something truly revolutionary.